But to be honest, when I started reading, when I went on your website and I started actually reading about it, and now after trying it, it tastes better than soy sauce would, very honestly.
Yeah. During in fact the pandemic, I was making mad chutney because these ants are just making nests all over the place.
Right, let's get a nice shot of that.
Wow. So that's the giant water bug chili paste from Thailand that a friend got me. And that is weaver ant chutney made from the ants that I harvested from my windowsill.
From your windowsill?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're going to give us the recipes for this. Hi everyone, and welcome to Don't Run Into Class, a podcast hosted by thecitizen.in. I'm Gautami.
And I'm Anika.
And Anika, what are we chatting about today?
Today, I think we're going to try something and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. Today, we're going to try some ant chutney and learn about this whole new food system.
Ant chutney?
Yeah.
So we have Tansha here with us.
Hi.
Tansha, why don't you actually introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. I am Tansha Bora. I'm a food writer and researcher. Primarily at this point researching and eating edible insects in India. I started a project 6 months ago called the Boochi Project. It's
By the way, I love that name, Boochi.
Yeah.
Because I went to boarding school and we were discriminated against because, you go to boarding school, girls get lice.
Yeah.
So anyone who had lice is like, you're Boochi, she's the Boochi girl.
Is that the slang? Is that the slang?
That was the term that I thought that was the term for lice.
That's what the Boochi in Kannada and means anything that's creepy crawly.
Oh, okay.
And so the idea was to take something that people generally like, oh, gross, disgusting, and turn it into something else and be like, wait, if you looked at it from a different perspective, maybe you get something else out of it.
Yeah, awesome. And I mean, I'm going to just point at these two, ingredients.
Hold it up, Getty.
Yeah. All right. Let's get a nice shot of that.
Wow.
So that's the giant water bug chili paste from Thailand that a friend got me. And that is weaver ant chutney made from the ants that I harvested from my windowsill.
From your windowsill?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're going to give us the recipes for this.
Done.
But before we get into that, I just kind of wanted to have this. Anika told me she knew of you.
Yeah.
Prior to this podcast.
Yeah, I met her at
India Art Fair.
India Art Fair, where with Serendipity Arts Festival, she had done a project and she was displaying there. So I took everyone who came to the fair to eat and crickets.
So you ate that.
I ate it.
You tried it.
It was nice and tangy and
Yeah.
it was very interesting.
Yeah.
But and that's where I got introduced. But I never asked you there, how did you get into
Yeah.
this?
So in 2018, I was writing for Homegrown, and I lived in Bombay for a year, and I was not enjoying my time in the city. So I left to go to Goa and do a permaculture design course. Basically, I just wanted to understand where my food comes from, how I grow it, how I can grow it, and how food can actually be grown in an ecosystem. I did a course, and then I continued to work at a farm for about a year, learning how to apply the principles of permaculture into an actual living, breathing space. And it was during my time there, we saw cacao. We had a cacao tree in the garden. It's called Rosie and Peter's Food Forest in Goa. There was a cacao tree, and it was fruiting, and I was very keen on the fruit. And I saw these ants also clearly keen on it and all over it. So I was like, you know what? No, I want this fruit. What are we gonna do? And Peter was just like, why don't you eat it? And
Eat it with the ants.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, why don't we eat the ants? So literally took 4 of us, massive secateurs, 2 garbage bags, 1 ladder, because we're all obviously city folk. I couldn't climb the tree, couldn't do any of it, but we climbed up this ladder, gone up,
Very excited.
cut this nest, got the holy shit bitten out of us, because they're so complex in the way they create their nests and the roles that they assign to all the different ants, that they know one leaf moves and they know that there's danger. So we cut them, we froze
I feel like
them.
an ant army must be charge.
I
Exactly.
swear to God, I've seen one see me and leap. Like it leapt from one branch to get me. Like I'm sure. Okay, I'm sure.
That is hilarious.
I actually have this fear now when I see ants in a line and coming towards me. I'm like, do they know that I've eaten their kind? That they're trying to it's just a fear in my head.
Are they holding a grudge?
Yeah, they're holding a grudge.
Yeah.
And do all ants know everything in the ant world. Like, I don't know, I just have a bunch of questions. But it always seems
They
like
have good Wi-Fi, I've heard.
they have yeah,
What
super,
spreads?
yeah,
Goes through
5G,
that.
what?
Antennas.
So we froze them. They died by freeze, like we
Yeah, that's how you do it to the
slowly
crabs
freeze them.
also, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Or dip them
recommended
into
way. Hot water, but freezing
Yeah,
is
so we
what
wanted to
is.
freeze them because we wanted the sourness. You can smell the sourness when you're cutting that nest and when you're inevitably squishing it to put it in a bag. It's a full hit of sour, and so we're like, no, we won't dilute it.
Yeah.
Froze them. We made ant tea, like ant out of them, and it was just like khatta nimbu pani, which is amazing. We put them in chocolate. We made chutney. We did a bunch of different things, and they weren't. I mean, they were actually pleasurable. Like, it was a really pleasurable experience. And once I'd seen that nest, I couldn't stop seeing it. Like, I would see it everywhere, and that's kind of what blew my mind. Is that, wait, I saw these ants in Goa, and then I saw them at home in Karnataka, and then I've seen them in Assam, and I saw them in Arunachal, and wait, are they everywhere? And that I did a little bit of research. I wrote a story for the Goya Journal on a recipe for ant chutney, and through my research I found that essentially this seems like news to me, and it's like, wait, why is this the first time I'm eating ants? But this is an age-old practice, and it's just to us in the city who've really kind of forgotten where our food comes from, or what really even is food, or what food can be. This seemed like news, but tons of communities, especially tribal communities in this country, eat insects on a regular daily basis. Over 2 billion people across the world consume insects. It's not a
It's very, very common in Asia.
Yeah,
Very.
yeah. I mean, I'm not even surprised by it. In
Yeah.
fact, like, I mean, once we opened the doors to this conversation, I kind of like realized that, I mean, if you look at it historically, human beings as hunter-gatherers, it's not possible for people to go out and like hunt big game meat on
all the
daily
time.
basis.
Yeah.
So what did people's diets actually consist of?
Absolutely.
What did they consist of?
There was this woman called Julie Lesnick. She's the world's only... So entomophagy is the practice of eating insects. Entomo, I think, means insects, and phagy means mouth. She's an archaeologist by profession, and she was working at the site in South Africa where they excavated bone tools that are thousands of years old, and they figured that the primary use of the bone tool that they had found was to harvest insects, specifically termites. And so this just like sparked a little note in her head, and she was like, wait, this has been a practice that we've been encouraging for over 3,000, 4,000 years. So what she started to do was really look into the history and how archaeology supports this history that they're excavating, and stopped to ask. When we had a conversation, she said, I'm going to tell you a story, and you tell me what you think. So we're all hunter-gatherers, and we're sitting around a fire. The women are at the fire with the children, and the men have gone out to hunt. And there's no food until this hunting party comes back. And she's just like, does that story make sense to you? Like, can you see that story playing itself out? And I just can't imagine a bunch of women sitting around saying, we're just going to do nothing.
Yeah.
And someone else is going to come and give us what we need to actually survive, like to physically be able to live.
Very interesting, yeah.
And what they inferred was, for a majority of, obviously people's lifespans were much shorter then. So for a majority of time, women were either pregnant or lactating. And there was no way that they were going to depend on a party who, one, may not come back, two, may not come back with enough, three, may come back, maybe enough, but they might eat first, and so you don't know how much you're going to be able to be left, you're going to have to eat. Just decided that we are going to be smarter about this and supplement our nutrition with sources of protein that are abundant and easily found, and different with each season, different almost every month, and created for themselves a very solid, regenerative, resilient food system. And that, I like to imagine that somebody's mother told her daughter how to live while being pregnant, and it's these stories that have passed over time, in a way that maybe we owe it to women to sort of safeguard this information and bring us this information that we have today.
Yeah, I think there are two interrelated points here. One is, of course, the fact what you just said, it's an abundant, easily available food source. And in today's world where we're really talking about climate change and we're talking about sustainable living,
Absolutely.
our food choices are very, they're very closely
Yeah.
linked to the choices that we make.
And
yeah.
I would also like this. I think it's important to recognize that our food choices are supremely important, but also the food choices of our food is really, really important.
Yeah.
So when you look at a very common comparison in the conversation about insect eating, they compare crickets to cattle, and crickets need 12 times as little feed as cattle does to produce the same amount of protein. I think it's six times as much as sheep, maybe half the time for pigs and chickens. But beef requires 12 times as much feed. And what's interesting is maybe not for cows, but for chickens certainly, instead of feeding them soy, instead of feeding them corn and I think last year was the first year India imported soy because there was so much consumption of it, we could feed chickens insects.
Yeah.
And they don't need as much land to be grown or farmed in. They hardly need any water. The gases that they give out when compared to the ammonia or the methane, methane by cows, it's almost it's crazy, the difference. And to see that with just these small little steps where we're not just making more sustainable choices for ourselves, but by extending it to the animals and to other food, that's really when you start seeing large impacts on the food system as a whole. And I think given how dire the circumstances now, we really need those kind of solutions, I think.
I mean, I think that's why people are talking so much more about eating insects, even though this is a conversation that shouldn't, be in like sort of small circles. It should be something that's a lot more widespread. Because there was another interesting point in an article that you'd written that I read, I think it was on your website, that talked about colonization and how actually eating insects historically was something that was, just part of your everyday life. You didn't really pass judgment on it. You didn't be like, okay, creepy crawly, I'm not going to eat that. It was a very integral part of like tribal communities' diet. But it was colonization that came in and sort of started viewing it from a different lens entirely.
Other lens.
Yeah.
From
Do you want to explain that a little bit?
Way of the barbarians.
Actually exactly that. I read Julie Lesnick's book, and she I think has a copy of a letter that one of Christopher Columbus's mates had written to someone back home.
Oh, cool.
And he described, I think there was somewhere in the Caribbean, I'm not actually sure where, but they were in this place, in this island, and he written to somebody saying, they're beasts here, they're savages. And the psychology, I think, of using those kinds of words is when you consider someone a beast, then they become a beast of burden, and you can impose basically anything you want onto this person.
You feel like you're civilizing them.
Right?
And you feel very positively about your colonization.
Doing all of this amazing stuff, but in exchange they're going to work in your fields, they're going to grow your food, they're going to build your homes, and they're going to help you live. So I had actually gone into this project initially thinking 100% it's the British, 100% they've...
blame it on any... If you don't know the answer, blame it on the British. You're probably right.
You're probably right. In this case, I was wrong.
Shashiji would agree.
I was very wrong. Because the British only came... they came when they did in the 1600s, whatever, the East India Company. But we have the caste system, which has for a much longer time imposed many, many more barriers on food, used food identity to classify who is considered to be clean, who's considered to be unclean, who's dirty. And that's actually plagued our identity, or our idea of food identity and individual identity. And I think that's really the toughest conversation to have when we talk about insects in India, is there is this idea of grossness or disgust, but how much of that disgust is from... disgust has a role, right? If you saw rotting flesh in the forest, no, you're not going to eat it. It's just self-preservation. But how much of that comes from learnt social behavior of, oh no, ganda khana hum wo nahi khate, un log ka khana hum wo nahi khate. Who is that? Who becomes this other? And how do we use food then to say somebody else is below us or not worthy of being their food is not worthy of being on our table, and so therefore they are not worthy of being on our table. And we create these silos within which we've learned to operate. And I think for us to be able to look at insects as an actual sustainable regenerative option, this is something we're going to have to have many more conversations on, and really sort of collectively accept that we've done this to our community and to people around us and the communities that live around us, and sort of take ownership for it and change that narrative, because that's the only way.
I wonder what would happen if I had like a dinner party here and I said, okay, surprise menu, and I fed everyone different. Like, how would people react? I almost wonder. But on that note, can you please try some of this stuff?
It. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you. I feel like this thing, there are so many others here in India, right?
Yeah.
And let's try it with the momos and the chutney.
Based or the chutney?
Alright, so just tell us which one is which again.
So this is a giant water bug chutney that a friend of mine got from Thailand.
Alright.
They're these bugs that they sun dry them.
Okay.
And they literally make this into a chili based concentrate that he just got for me. I'm sure you can just stir fry pretty much anything into it.
Like noodles?
Noodles, mushrooms, whatever you like.
You've got a plate for that, yeah.
I've got a plate.
And that's a ant chutney recipe that we it's now lived through many different iterations, and I'm not actually even sure anymore what my recipe is, but it's got chili, coconut, garlic.
Coconut.
Yeah, ants.
Okay, so my question is, are these recipes something that you've made up?
I was just going to take them now.
Have you made these recipes up, or did you look them up somewhere?
The ant chutney one was something that we just came up with on the farm. Like, we just, whatever ingredients we had around us. But I collected some recipes over the course of my project. And the Weaver ant chutney is this one that I collected from Geetika Saikya. She's a Assamese home chef in Bombay, and she actually cooks. They're a delicacy in her to her mind. So she waits, and I think her dad collected a bunch of ant eggs and ants for her, and she made this chutney, and so I asked her for a recipe, and she was very good to share it with me. But hers includes mustard oil. I didn't put mustard, and hers doesn't have coconut. Hers is very simple. It's just pretty much chili garlic.
So are there any allergy warnings that you need to give us?
Yes, you're typically allergic to shellfish, which you are.
I'm popping my last
still brave.
I better not die.
God, I hope not.
Just because of the shelly nature.
I'll be watching you closely. The ants I'm not so worried about.
Let's try.
The water bugs might be a bit.
So, I was the most sort of queasy eater on the planet.
Oh
so
my God.
literally, I think people who know me would just be like,
I
should make a NFT of Getty eating ants.
Guys have taken a nice big spread of it as well.
Yeah, to do it.
I'm eating the red one. It's quite
strong.
Yeah.
It's actually very tasty.
It has a nice tangy flavor.
Yeah.
So I'm eating the other one. That's the one I tried right now. It's a little sour as well. It's very nice.
Yeah, there's a sourness to ants, I think, in general, right?
So it's basically this, it's called formic acid, and it's what makes them taste tangy, but I'm pretty sure it has a defense. I'm pretty sure it might be linked to their defense mechanisms. I'm not entirely sure, but I think it could be. That's what gives them the sour kick, and to me that's just the taste. I love anything khatta, that's my favorite taste profile. So this was just right up my alley.
This is super tasty. I'm actually really surprised. I was very prepared to turn around and be like,
no, very good.
So this is the thing. So when I told Aditya, my husband, that we're shooting this podcast with Tansha, who works with eating insects, he was like, what are you going to do, eat a cockroach? And I was like, no, we're not trying to make this a gimmick. This is about actually people choosing insects as food sources. So obviously if they're an ingredient in a particular recipe, it's not going to taste terrible. It's going to probably taste good.
Yeah.
So but I think it still exceeded my expectations, especially the Weaver ant.
Yeah.
I think that one is.
I wanted to ask you one thing though. When we were talking about the other colonization, etc., right?
Yeah.
I feel like certainly there was a point in time where the narrative essentially changed for India, but India was generally one that had many others, many communities, many practices, and the country's geography is bloody rich.
Yeah.
So I feel like the history of eating insects in India goes way back, that you have already spoken about, but I think it's also quite varied.
Yeah.
Do you know of different communities relying on certain insects, particularly, and having special recipes. Like, tell me about this otherness, the variety and the richness of this food tradition.
So I think the most cited area geographically for insect eating is typically when we say the Northeast, and we just collectively put 7 states together and just refer to it as the Northeast. But almost each tribe, almost each different. The tribes are also broken up into depending on where you are, sub-tribes, or I'm not actually sure what the social category is, but a tribe is just a much larger umbrella term. Each community has a different recipe for these insects. I mean, the recipe that we got for the carpenter worm, like this recipe that my research collaborator Lobeno collected, this is not the way, like we found this recipe that used bamboo shoot extract and tree tomatoes, but there are communities where you don't get tree tomatoes, so they wouldn't eat it, and a lot of that depends on actually what ingredients you have access to. So even calling these recipes in a way is a bit, I think it turns the word on its head a little bit, because this is a recipe at that month in time at that place. It just so happened to be that this is what they had.
So it's like seasonal crops, seasonal fruit, seasonal vegetables.
Yeah.
So hold up, let's go back a little bit. Like, tell me the different varieties, and insect families that are considered.
So I think the most commonly eaten insects are just different kinds of caterpillars, or the pupae of different kinds of moths or butterflies. Ants, bees are eaten a lot, and in fact, one of the most interesting conversations I had was with a researcher from the Ashoka Trust, where they actually in Bangalore, they have an edible insect museum.
Oh, cool.
Not a lot of people know about it. It is one of the coolest spots I've ever been to. These guys told me, so I had actually encountered somebody posting a picture on Instagram of bee larvae, and they're like, these people, how important bees are to pollination and like life, and we can't like kill bees, and you can't be eating bees, and like we need
That's
bees.
exactly what they would have sounded like.
They
when
were
they were
100%,
making
they're
that.
like, oh, bees, don't you know?
That is exactly the sound that comes.
Yeah, bees. And so I was just like, oh shit, is that a thing? I was like, oh my god. So I asked this researcher, and I was like, this is something I came across, and what do you think? And so he was telling me how in their research in Arunachal, what they found was each home it keeps bees and has a little beehive, and it was found over time that it was that practice of each home kept keeping a beehive, and at some point eating some of that larvae was what helped keep the population of the bees alive to begin with. So, because the environment, their environment is being degraded at a very, very rapid pace, especially because they're building roads and they're hacking mountains down. These kind of human interventions have actually been beneficial, and if a human being feels that I may get something out of it that beyond just like this aesthetic value or this moralistic high ground, which maybe they don't even operate on, I'm imposing this on them. It's food, and it's nutrition, and it's a part of their culture and something that they've grown up with. So I think to expect someone to eradicate or change the way they eat based on some city dwellers' loose idea of how important bees are to the ecosystem is a bit.
Absolutely.
It's like I can't quite consider.
Also, I mean, that's where you have to check your privilege a little bit as well,
Absolutely.
right? Like, food choices for a vast majority of people are born
It's
out
not
of
a choice.
necessity.
Yeah,
what's
it's not a choice.
available in modern bazaar?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Most people don't know beyond modern bazaar.
Yeah.
I mean, look at how the pandemic challenged our idea of food, and how you couldn't just walk to your closest grocery store and just buy whatever you wanted, And it was during, in fact, the pandemic, I was making mad chutney because these ants are just making nests all over the place, and it's like, wait, why would I not collect this source of food when it's right in front of me?
Yeah.
Like, it just seemed like, and maybe this is also my, I don't know, like just a way that
Was this your banana bread chutney sandwiches?
I know, I love it. While
Was
the
this
rest
your
of
banana
us
bread?
basic people
Girl,
were
just
like
don't lie.
eating banana bread.
But I want to ask you one question. What is the into the wild version of these insects? Like, what insects are like you
So
were telling
the
us story
giant
the
hornets
first
are
time.
absolutely nuts. This is something that so Lobeno, my research collaborator, she did this incredible research on the giant hornet, which is, I think, in America there was this whole like massive fear about how they can sting you and you can die and all of these things. And yeah, you can, like you can die, but no one, when you live in that ecosystem where you know where the nests are, no one's going poking the hornet's nest. But what she researched was 2 tribes who would come up with just their own ways of semi-domesticating these insects, and they are like they can be fatal. A sting from a giant hornet can be fatal, but over time they figured out how to smoke them, how to put them in a place that is kind of outside of the village, but not so outside that you have to go all the way into the forest. They always leave the queen and a couple of hornets so they can go and rebuild a new nest. Yeah. They have all of these rules, sort of. It's quite codified. Like the carpenter worms, for example, when they hollow out the whole bark of a tree. And the idea to eat them is if you don't, they're going to spread and then they're going to clear a whole bunch of other trees. So you quickly go into like intercede and be like, no, wait, you've taken one tree, that's fine, but now we're going to take you as food. So in a way, it's like almost them giving you a service in a way, and then you continue to eat them, which is also the same for silkworm. They give you silk, and then I think it's a fantastic. Like I don't agree with this whole ahimsa silk stuff, because it's like, wait, you have fiber and you have food, and they can reproduce at incredibly large amounts. They reproduce a lot, and if you manage that life cycle and you can derive food that's GMO free, that's pesticide free, that's grown, that has none of this nonsense in it and is actually good for you, I support that.
I guess what I'm hearing is like it's based on like our food habits currently. I feel it's based on like what is convenient and what we know. And I don't remember at school, like, do you remember at school we were taught too much about food? We were just taught that we were at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah. No, which crazy enough, we were never we didn't start off at the top of the pyramid. We were somewhere in the lowly middle, and we had to be with each other and work as a community if we wanted to survive. And that's it's only time and technology and all of that's slowly made us feel that we're on top.
But there's something to recognize, I think, here is that firstly, food choices are a marker of privilege. So if you're choosing, let's say, to like not eat any, like, to be vegan or to make more sustainable food choices, you're doing that without expecting people who don't have that privilege to do it. So don't impose it on anyone else. Caste is a huge factor in like the lack of food choices. And so when you navigate these two and you choose, let's say if I choose not to eat meat or not to eat insects, that's fine. That's a personal choice as long as it's not being imposed. But I think these are conversations we didn't really ever have in school.
We never had them, and that's why the shock value, right? Like I remember the first time that I ate a fried cricket. I was that person who looked at it and like, ow, like I don't want to do it, guys. Like that typical, oh, is it going to get stuck in my teeth? Like all the cliches, right? And I felt squirmish after having that because it's such a deep-seated notion, right? And then I can only imagine also I live right next to a temple. Imagine if I give this chutney to the Panditji out there. Instant shrap I would do.
But I think it's interesting that you guys you brought up school and like the idea of reading about this, because I think that we often look at the presence of something as like validation, like, oh, okay, we learned about this, so this must be important. But sometimes it's also the absence of something that is almost as informative through the subject. And in this sense, I think why this is relevant is, if you look at tribal communities or different Dalit communities in India that do eat insects and have traditionally, culturally eaten insects, they didn't have access to the tools to document this, or they didn't have ways in which they could write recipe books or create collectively.
And it's an oral tradition.
It's mostly oral. So then how do you where do you go as a food researcher, for example, you can't just go onto the internet and be like, oh, I want to know what Dalit communities, like, that's not how it works. It's like, firstly, and I was reading, going through Rajshri Goodi's work, where she's created a book on Dalit recipes, and often people are like, what is a Dalit recipe, like, what does that even mean? And her recipe, she says, and she's like, it's a recipe just because that's the word that your brain can sort of make sense of, but it's not really a recipe. It talks about people waiting outside a wedding hall for people to drop their leaves filled with leftovers, and you take the leftovers and you cook that leftover, and that becomes your, I think the word for it is ukadala, and that becomes your meal, you know. And so it's like, what is your recipe? There's no 200 grams of tomatoes, like that doesn't exist. And I think that's also in a similar way when you talk about insects and talk about, you know, documenting these kind of ingredients that come with such a weight and baggage. I think it becomes difficult to like codify this unless you sit, talk, observe, and sort of normalize this idea of, you know, there's no such thing as impure food, there's no such thing as you being an impure person for eating these kinds of foods. And which is why I think I enjoy this stable of bhel puri and viva and chutney and, you know, momos and all of this, because to me, while I understand where this comes from, it's still on my table now being normalized, and I don't want to have this like exoticized idea of what this food might be. It's just, this is now my normal. Like, I have ants in my fridge all the time, and
it's your banana bread.
Yeah, it is my
banana bread.
It's my banana bread.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's you have to sort of like move beyond certain things, but I also don't want us to emphasize, you know, the historical or the you know, the sort of like the caste angle to it, because we know that's the reality. But for some of us, let's say at least for the three of us, it's also been possible thanks to our privilege to move beyond that reality.
Absolutely.
So while acknowledging it, we can at least, like, we can sit and we can enjoy that without that stigma, without any of that historical baggage, right?
And I think once we accept that there is certain baggage, once we've done, I think, taken some time to sort of put things into perspective and build the context around which this conversation can be had, I personally am interested in not so much the past as I am in thinking about insects in the future.
So that's what you're going to do. You're going to study this, right?
Yeah, essentially.
As a food system.
This is what I want to. This is what I want to study. This is what I want to like actively put my resources into, because I think so. There's this. It's my most favorite insect so far. I haven't eaten too many, about maybe 10, 12, but this is my favorite so far. It's the larvae of the black soldier fly. If you guys compost at home, or if anyone's composting really, if you have your khamba with all of your organic waste in it and you open it, and if you haven't put enough brown matter to green matter, you'll see mad amounts of maggots, those white crawly things, decomposing your waste. Firstly, they come out of no, you don't have to do anything.
That's how human life evolved. The Big Bang happened out of this maggots.
They are there. Okay.
I don't know where they come from, but they just come.
Monica, now you're like sort of taking us to the edge of, like, I don't know, or completely.
I'm telling you. They started from single cell, became double cell, and then they became this huge.
In our newest theory of like human evolution, groundbreaking.
We came from
comes from your compost plant.
I mean,
yes.
we're all from compost.
Yes.
All from compost. These guys break down your waste, so you have compost literally for your garden, and massive companies like Nestle and Mars in Europe are making pet food out of it.
Oh, really?
They're feeding it to dogs and cats. Dogs are it's hypoallergenic to dogs. There's no issue with feeding them these insects. Incredibly nutrient dense. You're using a waste resource to create a whole new resource, which to me, it just has the perfect anatomy for solution, because you're not buying something from somewhere to make something else, so you're literally using someone's trash, someone's garbage, not absolutely, literally, and you're creating a food source that these three people, I think, in South Africa, have taken this insect, pulverized it in this machine, and are now making ento ice cream. Like, they're making insect-based milk, and they're using that milk to make ice cream, and they have a gourmet.
You also
ice
said
cream
cockroach
company.
milk is the new thing.
Yeah, you said that earlier as well.
Silvery
Guys, so I just want to
liquid.
also like point, bring this up. It's also so cultural. Like, now you said cockroach milk, I'm like, disgusting.
Yeah.
You said like maggots, which is another word that like causes a lot of trauma in me.
But if I said black soldier fly,
yeah, me too, dogs.
I have no problem if you said black soldier fly.
Just the word.
It's the word. So
maggot.
it's just so. It's
Because we've
it's
had our
such
dogs,
ingrained-
have maggots
maggot
eating them
wounds,
up. So for us, it's like devastation.
Yeah.
But that's my point. Our like sort of like ickiness is learned behavior.
Yeah.
Like, it's like someone has taught us over our childhood or whatever to be like, you creepy crawly, you can't eat that, that's
Yeah.
disgusting. And I was telling you this earlier, like with my daughter, I've like tried to make a point that like, don't teach her that insects are scary, don't go ooh and don't jump, and let her just like, I mean, we live on a farm, so she should hopefully
Get
like
used
grow
to
up
it.
not being scared of like insects and things like that. But it's interesting because it is
I mean,
just
there's
learned
a role.
behavior.
There's role for fear, and I think there's a healthy amount of fear that can keep you alive. But there's no need for like unnecessary fear. You'd rather understand it than be afraid of it. I suppose.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would try the cockroach milk though. I think maybe that's where
maybe
I would draw
one day
the
when
line.
it's like in this super silver color packaging.
But
and
that
it's
is
like
what's
going to
happening.
space.
I mean, I was reading a couple of articles about how like, you know, like now Michelin star chefs are like trying out insect recipes. It's like the craze right now. So I mean, where's the fine line between, I don't know, maybe just being a trendy thing in a couple of circles versus it becoming a more sustainable way of life?
So I think the way I look at it, I think it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. I think the more egalitarian our tables become at home, I think the more restaurants start, you know, the industry, I think, from the little bit that I'm aware of, it kind of cultivates an idea or an attitude of adventure in a way, where you're like challenging your notions of food or what food might look like, or you know, everyone's doing so many
I
different
want to
kinds
say
of
something I experienced. I want to answer your question a little bit because that's where I first learned about insects, Girti. When I was in Japan, the first time I noticed was whenever I walked into a forest, almost every tree, it was so common for them to harvest insects. And they used to do a very simple thing, just put those plastic water bottles on top, and they used to just funnel insects in and then pick it up in the evening. That's how insect farming happened all the time. And Japan is known for great food. We love Japanese food, right? So they really cared about the flavor and the taste and umami. And we know that they care about their food systems a lot. Like it is a law for them to put the calorie count, the nutritional content, and it is part of law, right? So I looked upon it as, because of that ingraining, even though I could not eat the first fried cricket, but I understood this as a very advanced food system. So what you were saying earlier about how much nutritional content is there as opposed to how much material it needs for feed, and what it can give back to us and how easily harvested it can be in like in your own house, chutney sandwiches, right? But so I feel like it's like this advanced food system, and I feel like certainly university is a very privileged place to educate the world about anything, but I hope it really comes into the foray, you know, this kind of research, not behind paywalls, but like in regular newspapers, because it's quite nutritional.
But see, I think that's where restaurants could come in, because I think that's the more we sort of normalize these ingredients and sort of build access to them, because also if we look at it now, it took me other than the ants, for example, which I found in my gardens, the grasshoppers I had a friend send me from Nagaland. Now for a restaurant who's going to have to start demanding certain amount of quantities and all of that, it gets a little complicated, because it's like, wait, now are you disrupting, you know, nature's patterns to sort of manage your quantities for your restaurant, or are you just using what you have in a unique way? So my most favorite example to cite is Noma in Copenhagen, where they've been using insect as their main protein, and they've been using koji, which is a Japanese mold. It's a mold that it's not a Japanese mold. It's a mold that the Japanese domesticated. Like a fungi. Okay. Like, kind of like it is in the fungi family. There's spores of koji that were found on rice, and the Japanese, I think, domesticated this mold and have grown it since on rice and barley, and they use it to sort of break down protein into different amino acids, and it just eventually develops into a huge flavor bomb. Noma's been making grasshopper miso, grasshopper amino sauces for a while, and for my project for Boochi for the residency, I was inspired by them. So I was using koji to break down grasshoppers and ants to see if we could create a potent amino protein paste or a sauce, and it's still developing, so hopefully in a couple of months I'll be able to test it to see actually what these quantities are, how much protein is in there, what are the different kinds of amino acids, all of that. But if it, and it's our first trial, so we're fully ready to fail, but if we get any of this information from, if we actually manage to track any of this information, I think this could be a very unique way to concentrate nutrition and flavor and not compromise our planet to do so, because this could be an alternative to soy sauce and fish sauce. And as we all, at least as the three of us know, the Amazon is being cut for soy plantations for cattle. Our oceans are overfished. We have directly imported soy, so now we are contributing to the destruction of rainforests for soy. And I just think that if we have alternatives that don't need all of that, why are we not using them? And why are we shying away from innovation and solutions when our history is steeped with this information and we have access to it? I just think that if we start looking at it as a solution and start being more future oriented, I think it might, at least to my perspective, be beneficial at this point.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we are also running out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. But I have to admit that when Anika told me about this episode and she said we're going to be eating insects,
pushing her to do
I was
things.
like, dude, I'm not eating any insects, that was my first reaction because it's me, I'm like the least adventurous person on the planet. And then Anika was like, dude, do you want views or not?
I said that.
So I was like, okay, fine.
Do you want views or not?
I'll do anything for views. But to be honest, when I started reading, when I went on your website and I started actually reading about it, and now after trying it, it tastes better than soy sauce would, very honestly. I just realized that it's just such a silly hang up to have. So you're right. I think if the restaurant industry, people in the food space normalized this, it would make a big impact for people like me, who would initially have apprehensions, but who actually, we don't have a caste baggage on it, we don't really have the historical baggage, so start with us, start with people like me who would be
you start and put it on Zomato and it's going to go far.
So I think that's our message here.
I think eventually if we get there, that would be, I think, quite remarkable to see that happen in India. But I think even this to me is a step forward, that we're sitting having this conversation. I don't know if I'm the most representative voice for this conversation, but it just so happens that I'm here now and I'm researching it and I'm bloody knee deep in insects at this point. So I think that it's sort of opened up doors and conversations that I didn't expect. I've met this woman who runs this company called Canine India, and she's making insect-based dog treats in India.
Amazing.
They're absolutely, you can order them online. You can feed your dog insects that are actually good for them. Honestly, you should be able to eat for the most part, you should be able to eat what your dog eats. If you can't, then there's a whole other thing. There's a whole other bunch of shit going wrong. Obviously, no one's saying eat raw meat, but your dog can, and your dog, if you could start. It's a crazy fact, okay? The amount of carbon that's given out from pet food equates to the carbon emissions of the Philippines.
That's crazy.
Yeah, globally for pet food is the same amount of carbon emissions of the Philippines.
I make khichdi for my dog.
Let's start somewhere. I think we should, and if you can start
I feel like all of our podcast episodes come down to this. No one is expecting change overnight. No one is saying that, just start eating insects tomorrow.
And it's not for everyone. Not everyone has to do this. Not everyone has to be like, I'm not going to eat chicken again. I'm only... No. We can all eat it in little ways. We can all make the changes that we resonate with. I just think the choice is yours, but let's just have the information first, and let's start talking about this first before we choose to put insects on our plate, I suppose.
Awesome. Okay, so I think we're going to have to wrap up here. This was delicious. I'm going to eat some more of it. But thank you, Tansha, for joining us.
Thank you for this.
And Anika, first video.
First video. Guys, I think it's been a year.
It's been a year.
Don't run into glass.
All right, thanks.